Tonight's story is Within the Trees. I've always loved horror stories. When you're a kid, most of the world is so unknowable it feels mysterious, like anything at all could be possible. You just haven't seen it yet. When you grow up, of course, the magic wears off and the boring reality of closets without monsters and dark rooms with nothing to hide sets in. As 10-year-old obsessed with scary books and campfire stories, I believed in everything and wanted nothing more than to prove their reality. I spent hours walking the trails near my house on dark, foggy days and stayed up long after my parents were asleep in hopes of seeing a flickering light or a couch moving by itself. I was terrified and fascinated all at once, and I was sure there was something out there that only I could discover. My first taste of the supernatural was from a story my best friend Jack told me when we were around 7 or 8. His family had moved house only recently, and one of the reasons he told me was because their old one was haunted. One night, he was lying in bed trying to sleep when he heard voices coming from down the hallway. He thought nothing of it at first. It was probably his parents, so he turned over and tried to fall asleep. But the longer it went on, the more he listened to them. There was only one voice, female, but it didn't sound like his mother or sister. So he got out of bed, put on his dressing gown, and walked to the door. Pressing his ear against it, he could hear the voice louder, but he couldn't tell what it was saying. He opened the door as slowly as he could. Yellow light from the hallway spilled through the widening gap. He stepped out and walked down the hallway and around the corner, but there was no one around. Then he heard the whispers coming from downstairs, but by the time he got to the bottom, they were gone. He stood still on the last step for a few moments, looking out into the dark living room. He couldn't see anyone, and he didn't want to look any further. It doesn't sound very convincing looking back, but it creeped the hell out of me at that age, especially when he told me his parents had heard the voice before. And when they told him the last owner, an old lady, had died in the house, that was all the both of us needed to believe without question. The house was definitely haunted, and that was definitely why they moved out. The other big ghost story at that age was told to us by another friend, a tall, red-headed kid called Alex. Alex's story came from his older brother, a 16-year-old who, to us, gave the tale ultimate authority. It was a ritual, he said. You go into a bathroom, run both the taps in the sink, turn out all the lights, and look at yourself in the mirror. Then you close your eyes and say, Bloody Mary, 3 times. When you open your eyes, you see a woman's face in the mirror covered in blood, and then she kills you. This one was pretty silly, especially as I now know it's an urban legend that goes back decades in England. But I'll never forget how scared I felt standing alone in the schoolyard while Jack and a few of the other boys went into the bathroom to try it out. I was so sure I'd never see Jack again. When I was 11, I started my first year of secondary school. That was where I first heard about the monster in the woods. At that age, I was allowed to play browser games on my dad's laptop at the weekends, and when no one was looking, I would scour the web for ghost stories and urban legends. I became hooked and read through probably hundreds of short tales on forums and local myths on forgotten websites. I memorized my favorites and would sit around with my friends at school at lunchtime, telling them as best I could. I wasn't much of a storyteller, but I had a great time trying to scare everyone. All boys at that age seemed to enjoy a scary story, but only 2 loved them as much as me, Jack and my other best friend at the time, Roger. Roger was tall and confident and was the social butterfly of our trio, While Jack and I were quiet, he was loud and funny and always making new friends. We got on like a house on fire. It was Roger who first told us about the monster. Walking home from school one sunny afternoon, talking and joking, he said, "Do you guys know the Gnawbone?" "What's the Gnawbone?" I asked, immediately serious. "It's a monster in the forest down Landing Lane," he said. "You just made that up," said Jack. "Nuh-uh, Simon told me." "Simon's a liar, Roger," said Jack. "He's just joking with you." "No way," said Roger, shaking his head. "He heard about some kids from Drury Road School that went down there a few weeks ago and got chased out by the Gnawbone." "We're not stupid," said Jack. "What did it look like?" I asked. "It was like white all over and had these huge teeth," Roger said, indicating with his hands, "and it crawled like a dog and ran after them." "I don't believe it," said Jack. "Why wouldn't the police do something about it?" "Don't be stupid, Jack. The police wouldn't believe them anyway," I said. "We've got to go check it out, guys." "Yes, we'll hunt this thing down and kill it," said Roger. "Okay then, but I still think it's a joke," said Jack. "We better be prepared though," I said. "The Gnawbone sounds pretty dangerous." "We'll bring some weapons," said Roger. "It'll be no match for us. I'll get my dad's flashlight. Meet by the Landing Lane sign tonight then," I said. We ran back home grinning. We were finally going to catch a real-life monster. I could hardly sit still during dinner, and the clock seemed to be going much slower than usual. At last, the sun began to set, and I told my parents I was going out to Jack's house for a sleepover. It was the weekend tomorrow, so I knew they wouldn't mind. I stepped out the door with my father's big silver flashlight in one hand and a toy sword tucked inside my belt. It was made of hard, thick wood with a red painted handle, and I thought it would do some serious damage if we got into any danger. I set out for Landing Lane, ready for adventure. When I reached the sign, Jack and Roger were already waiting for me. Jack was holding a ring spanner, and Roger was holding a small plastic gun that fired rubber darts. "The Gnawbone's gonna be fucked," said Roger, seeing my sword. "If we can even find it," said Jack. "I was going to bring the cap gun I modified," said Roger. "You know, the one that shoots real bullets. But I left it at my cousin's house." "This stuff'll be good enough," I said. "Come on, let's go." We started down the path as the sun sunk down over the horizon. Landing Lane went up from a cul-de-sac off the main road and wound down through a series of fields and little country houses. But a short way up it, there was a narrow dirt trail that ran off downhill and along a river that went for miles. We turned down and followed the trail, where it quickly became dense in trees and overgrown grass. "Where did they see the Gnawbone?" I asked Roger. "I think it was past the weir," he said, "where the woods are." We crossed the footbridge and came to the fork in the trail. If you turn right, you follow the river across miles of open country. If you turn left, you go past the weir and into the woods. We turned left. "Cliff, turn the flashlight on," Jack said to me. It was getting dark now, and it was hard to see where we were going. I found the rubber button with my thumb, but when I clicked it, nothing happened. "Isn't it working?" said Roger. "Hang on," I said, hitting the top a few times. It came to life and lit up the weir in front of us. I clicked it to the highest setting. "Wow, that's great," said Roger. "We can see anything with this." We trudged along in unison, me sweeping the flashlight and Roger pointing his dart gun ahead with both hands. We followed the trail across the creek and up a dirt hill where the trees leaned together. blocking out almost all of the moonlight. We had been in the woods several minutes when Roger stopped us. "Look over there. I think I see something," he said, pointing through the brush and past the fence. "We're not supposed to leave the trail, Roger," I said. "This is important. We're the only ones with the chance to catch it," he said. I decided he was right and Jack agreed, so we stepped off the trail and over the rotting fence. We continued walking at a slower pace. The brush was thick and we had to constantly push through branches and leaves to make progress. We couldn't see much in front of us anymore as the flashlight only lit up as far as the next tree hanging down in our way. "What did you see up here, Roger?" asked Jack. "I don't know, it just looked interesting," he replied. "Keep going, we'll find something soon." We pressed forward until we came to a clearing with a line of pine trees on one side and the dirt covered in dead autumn leaves. "Hey, check this out," said Jack. He was crouched in the dirt holding a burgundy wool scarf. Roger and I walked over to him. "Monsters don't wear scarves, dummy," said Roger. "No, but someone was out here. How did they find it when we went off the trail?" said Jack. "Let's keep looking," I said, excitement growing. I walked past the bush we'd came through and pointed the flashlight out down the row of pine trees. The clearing stretched out farther than I could see. "Hey, I think this is a path, guys," I said. "Awesome, maybe this is the Gnawbone's den," said Roger. We huddled together and walked along the hidden road. I took the sword out of my belt and brandished it in front of me. Roger pointed the dart gun ahead and Jack readied the spanner. We crept along looking for signs of a den. Snap! We spun around in unison, pointing our light and weapons in the direction of the sound. It sounded like a twig snapping, but we saw no culprit. "You guys heard that too, right?" said Jack. "Let's go quicker, guys," said Roger. We walked faster, throwing glances over our shoulders until something big came into the view of the flashlight. It was a house, a big old brick house with 2 stories and a big chimney on the roof. The bricks were cracked behind layers of moss. The roof was missing tiles, and half the windows were smashed in. "Whoa, what's that?" I whispered. "This must be where the Gnawbone lives," replied Roger. We walked towards the house and saw no one around. The door was open and there was a faded sign above it. "St. Margaret's Home for the Chronically Insane." "Wow, it's an old asylum," said Jack. "What's an asylum?" asked Roger. "It's where you go if you're crazy," said Jack. "Don't you live in one?" We laughed and shone the flashlight through some of the ground floor windows. We couldn't make out any people or any furniture inside. "Should we go in?" said Roger, suddenly seeming a little less confident than usual. "Okay," I said. Battling the Gnawbone didn't seem so easy now we were here. We crept up the steps and peered through the door. It looked empty. "You go first," said Roger. "No way, you've got a gun," I replied. Roger stepped up to the door frame and put his back against the wall, gun in both hands. He then spun around and strode inside with it pointed in front of him, just like we had seen cops do in movies. "This room's clear," he whispered. We followed him inside. The room looked like it used to be a reception area with a long wooden desk built into the corner and a stairwell leading up to the next floor. "Let's go upstairs," I said. "It's probably hidden up there." Roger led the way up the stairwell, and we stepped into a large ward lined with rusty metal hospital beds. "This is so creepy, guys," said Roger. I walked along the room, swinging the flashlight across everything. Then I stopped dead, light pointing at the wall. "Guys," I said, "look at this." On the wall was some graffiti written in green spray paint. It said, "I walk the trees, night by night I know each one by name. In sight I find the children all alone, and rip and tear and gnaw the bones." "What the fuck?" said Roger. "That's so creepy," said Jack. "I wonder who wrote it." "I think we should get out of here," I said. "Yeah, he's probably not here anyways," said Roger. "Gnawbone got off lucky tonight." Jack and I managed to chuckle and we headed downstairs. We stepped out the door and walked down the way we came. The atmosphere was lighter now we were heading home, and we laughed and joked as we strode through the leaves. Roger just got to the end of a funny story about his cousin when we heard it. Footsteps. We must have been making quite a lot of noise as we came down, so we didn't notice it at first, but in the silence it was obvious. We all froze in our tracks and the footsteps stopped a second later. We stood there a moment, too scared to turn around. "Did you guys hear that?" I whispered as quietly as I could. I saw them nod. I motioned for them to keep walking again, hoping desperately that we were mistaken. But we weren't. I heard the footsteps start again with us, trying to keep in rhythm with ours, but not quite succeeding. "Run!" I yelled, and we took off sprinting across the leaves. "Look for the scarf," yelled Jack. "That's where we turned off." As we ran, I was sure I heard the footsteps start to run as well. Without turning, I threw my sword behind me as hard as I could, but I didn't hear it hit anything, just the sound as it dropped to the dirt. I saw the scarf up ahead and the hole in the bushes where we came out from. We dived in and began the fight through the greenery. It seemed even more dense and hard to push through now, and I was running low on energy. It was a cold night in autumn, and I wished I had worn my coat. Then I tripped on a tree root and hit the ground. The flashlight fell from my hand and went out. My friends pulled me up and grabbed it, but it wouldn't turn on again, even when I hit it. We had no choice but to push on without light and find our way home. We finally made it back to the trail, covered in scratches and nettle stings. We stopped for a second to catch our breath, but I heard rustling back where we came from, and we sprinted down the trail hoping we had picked the right direction. I knew we did when I saw the river emerge from the trees in the moonlight. We were almost safe. When we were far enough away from the woods, we went the rest of the way at a quick walk. None of us had heard footsteps in a little while, but we didn't feel much better. After what seemed like an eternity, we were off the trail and back on the paved footpath of Landing Lane. We walked down to the cul-de-sac and under the street lamps, the first light we had seen for a while. We walked to the main road and set off up the hill to Roger's house for night. We knew his parents wouldn't mind us being out so late, as long as we were quiet. As we lay in our blankets piled on Roger's floor, we discussed what had happened on our adventure. It was definitely the Gnawbone following us, we decided, and we'd tell everyone at school on Monday. When Monday came around, most of them didn't believe us, of course. We were too well known as horror fans to make any kind of convincing case for our encounter out in the woods, even when Roger showed his scratches to anyone who would look. But it didn't matter to us. We knew what had happened, and were certain we'd had a close encounter with the paranormal. As excited as we were, though, we never went down Landing Lane after dark again. Things went on as normal after that. I was still reading horror stories and still obsessed with proving them to be real. I wrote off the Gnawbone as a confirmed case and moved on to others, though I never got anywhere as close to any of them. As we got older, Roger and his family moved away. We tried to stay in touch, but you know how it goes when you're little. It was a 3-hour car ride away, and to us he might as well have been on the moon. Jack and I never saw him again after we turned 12. Eventually, I left school, got a job, and moved out of town. I still kept in touch with Jack, but I got busy and didn't see him as often as I wanted to. Until one day, at the ripe old age of 24, I got a call from him. The drive to Drury was long. I spent what felt like hours twisting through narrow country roads, and it was giving me a headache. The car seat was too uncomfortable for these long-distance journeys, and I was longing to get there as soon as possible. Just as the sun was starting its descent into the horizon, the sign announcing my arrival came into view. It was a beautiful, quiet afternoon as I drove up to the small bed and breakfast I used to walk past every day on the way to school. I checked in and unpacked the car, just a suitcase and my jacket. I really didn't know how long I'd be in town, as Jack didn't give much away on the phone. He just said I'd want to take a few weeks off work, and he'd explain everything to me in person. As we weren't going to meet until tomorrow, I decided to take a walk around before dark and get an early night. I walked down the road and over the railway tracks. I passed by the park we used to in, and the area was like a ghost town. There were always kids playing out here around this time, whatever day of the week it was. I continued past my old house and soon inexplicably found myself stepping onto Landing Lane. I walked past the old sign on the cul-de-sac and went far enough up the path that I could see the trail leading off towards the river. I looked at it and chuckled, remembering that night 13 years ago. But I still didn't go down it. I turned around and headed back to the bed and breakfast for the night. The next morning, I got up, got dressed, and around lunchtime I drove down the road to the local pub where I was due to meet Jack. I parked, stepped through the door, and there he was, waiting in the doorway. "Jack, how have you been?" I said. We shook hands and exchanged greetings. It had been a long while since we last saw each other. We walked over to a table and sat down. "All right then, Jack," I said. "What are we doing down here?" Jack sighed. "I found out something," he said, "about this town." "What is it? What's going on?" I asked. For the last few years, Jack had been a social worker for the local councils in the area. He didn't live in Drury anymore either, but he wasn't as far away as me. Anyway, Jack explained to me that while looking through some case files, he discovered a report of a 12-year-old boy from Drury who had disappeared around 10 months ago. The strange thing, he said, was that there were virtually no news stories about it, no large manhunts, and the official explanation was that the kid ran away from home in the middle of the night. Then he dug deeper. He found another case, a little over 2 years old. Same story, this time a 10-year girl. No news, no trace, ran away in the night. All in all, Jack found a total of 9 cases, dating as far back as nearly 12 years. All missing under the same circumstances. No one was talking about them. "Wow," I said when he was finished. "That's a hell of a story, Jack. Do you believe me?" he asked. "Yeah, of course," I said. "It's just a little hard to stomach, you know." "Yeah, I haven't slept much the last few weeks," he said. "So is this why you wanted to come back here? To find out what happened to them?" I asked. "I know it sounds like a long shot, but we know this place. I think we can learn something, and I know for sure I can trust you," he said. "Trust me? What are you getting at? Why isn't this national news? Something weird is going on in Drury, and I think it's being covered up." "I don't know," I said. "None of this feels right to me." "Me neither, but I need you for this." "Will you help me?" he said. "For old time's sake." I sighed and put my head in my palms. Of course. Jack and I decided to start by calling up as many of our old friends as we could find numbers for. We stood out in the parking lot and spoke to maybe a dozen people between us. Most of them had moved out of town years ago, and like us, none of them had heard about any children running away from home in the area. I'm sure they all thought we were a little crazy for asking them what we did, but it was the best lead we could think of. In fact, the only one who was still in Drury was Rachel. Rachel was one of the few girls in school we ever exchanged more than a few sentences with. She was tall and smart and had the kind of crude sense of humor you usually only see in 12-year-old boys. Neither of us had seen her since leaving school, but her number still worked, and she might know something we could go off. We arranged to meet her in person. That way we could explain our findings. But she wasn't free until the weekend, which was 4 days away. That was fine. We could kill time with more research. Since Jack had already exhausted what little information the internet had to offer, we went down to the local library to see what we could find the old-fashioned way. It was a large building for a small town. The original had stood since 1927 and had been modernized about 30 years ago. We walked the stone steps to the door and found a computer that could be used to access an archive of local and national newspapers dating as far back as the 1700s. Our belief was that at least one of them had to have a mention of one of the missing kids. We spent all of that afternoon trawling through article after article and paper after paper, turning up nothing. We did this for most of the next 2 days, until around 5 o'clock on the Friday afternoon, something piqued our interest. It didn't have anything to do with our mystery on the surface, but it was the first truly odd thing we came across. Tucked away in the corner of a page was a short paragraph with a headline, and no pictures. Railway carriages disappear. On the morning of the 21st, one eagle-eyed dog walker was out by the river past Landing Lane when he noticed the disappearance of the railway carriages. Originally built in the 1910s, these cars have sat undisturbed on the disused railway track for around the last 20 years, a common sight for those walking the path by the river. "I find the whole thing thoroughly strange," said the man to our reporter. "They were here when I walked past the other day, and now they're gone without a trace." When I was around 5 or 6 years old, my father took me for a walk down Landing Lane. He was an amateur photographer in his free time, and he brought me along to take pictures of those old train cars, sat abandoned and reclaimed by nature. Reading this article brought back the memory, and I could see them in my mind clear as day. I was never down there enough to notice that they'd vanished. I told this to Jack, and he had no recollection of them at all, but he agreed that it was strange. Having no other leads until Saturday, we decided to go down there and find where the carriages used to be. We wasted no time in driving to Landing Lane. I parked the car in the quiet cul-de-sac by the sign, and we stepped out onto the path we hadn't trodden for 13 years. We took the turning onto the trail, followed it along the river, and crossed the bridge. I glanced over at the forest as we took the right turn away from it, and kept walking with the river. It wasn't long before we found the spot we were searching for. You could see the top of the tracks on the other side of the water where the train presumably used to run, and as was usual to us, they were empty. There was no path on that side of the river, but I for one wanted a closer look. We walked back and crossed over the bridge again, this time climbing down the other side. We had tread carefully across the steep, grassy banks, but we managed to reach the tracks without falling in. "Here it is," I said, not sure there's much we can do here now. We trudged around looking at the tracks. They'd been abandoned for decades and were now just rusty bits of metal left to fester in the grass. "Hey, do you know where this track went?" asked Jack. "No, I never really thought about it before," I replied. "I was just thinking I've never seen any other abandoned train tracks anywhere in town." He said, "Yeah, me neither. You want to see where they go?" We walked across the grass, stepping over rotten sleepers, guided by the tracks. After a while, the dark fell, and I stopped recognizing where we were. Since we didn't bring any flashlights, we had to rely on the pale full moon to guide us. "Do you remember last time we were a year after dark?" Jack said. "Of course," I laughed, "when we came out to find that monster." "Yeah, the Gnawbone, wasn't it called?" said Jack. "Oh yeah, that's right," I said. "Remember that building we found? Man, that was creepy." Jack laughed. "Yeah, man," I laughed. "Did you ever go back there?" "No, you?" "No." Eventually, the track turned under a bridge I'd never seen before and disappeared into an underground tunnel. We stopped short of it and stared into the dark hole. "I figure it carries on through there then," I said. "Shame we didn't bring any equipment. I really wanted to know where it led," said Jack. "We could go down and see if we can see the other end of the tunnel," I said. We walked down into the entrance of the tunnel. There was no light visible from the other end. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I noticed something unusual. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I asked Jack. "Is that them?" He said. On the track, a short way down the tunnel, stood 6 or 7 abandoned train cars. Even in the darkness, you could see the peeling paint and rusted metal. Without exchanging a word, Jack and I walked over to them. It was dead silent. The door of the first carriage was open, and I could just about make out some writing across the top of the doorway. It looked like it was made with spray paint. I climbed up the few steps in front of the door and got my face as close as I could. "Waiting room?" I said. "It says waiting room." "Must have been teenagers," said Jack. "This is probably a good spot to hang out for them. We would have if we'd known about it." I stepped through the door, and Jack wasn't far behind. It was a passenger carriage with rows of bench seats down either side. I walked between them, my eyes adjusting to see better with each step. The cushions on the seats had a faint crisscross pattern, and some were covered in holes that looked like had been made with a blade. I thought it probably was a popular hangout for bored teens. We walked through the open connecting door and went through several carriages that all looked the same as the first. Then we arrived at the last one. This was also a passenger carriage lined with seats, but the one at the far end was different. I had to do a double take when first saw it. "Whoa, look at this," I said. Jack caught up and leaned in for a better view. Several large brown stains covered the seat. "Is that blood?" I said. "Can't be sure," said Jack, "but it certainly looks that way." He dragged his fingertips across one of the patches of brown. "It feels like it," he said. "Wait, there's something on the floor." He leaned in towards the floor and came up with something in his hands. As I stared at it, I realized it was a small stuffed giraffe toy. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I said. "This is seriously weird," he said. "Do you think it has something to do with our investigation?" I asked. "I don't know. I feel like I've seen it somewhere before," said Jack. "Was it mentioned in one of the case files?" I said. "Maybe. I can't remember." "This is getting creepy," I said. "Let's get out of here." We walked back to the first carriage quicker than on the way down, but when we finally reached the door, it was shut. "What the fuck?" I said. "This was open." "Shh," said Jack. "Is there anyone outside?" I peered through the smudged glass window, but I could barely see a thing in the pitch blackness of the tunnel. "I don't think so," I said. "It's hard to tell." I tried the handle and it wouldn't budge. "Locked. Is there anything in here we can use to break the glass?" I said. Jack went over to one of the windows in the aisle. He stuck his fingers under the bottom, managed to tug it open. "Squeeze through here," he said. It was a tight fit, but we managed to force our bodies through the opening and landed on the ground outside the carriage. Without wasting a second, we sprinted out of the tunnel and didn't slow down until we were sure no one was following us. We walked back along the tracks, listening for anyone who might come up behind us. We climbed back up the bridge and onto the trail, following it back to the car in the cul-de-sac. We got in and could finally relax, and as we drove down the main road, the cool night air rushed in through the windows. "Well, we found those carriages. How the hell did they get there, though?" I said. "Maybe driven down the track. No idea who would want to do that," said Jack. We were driving past the old park when we heard something through the window that sent a chill up my spine. A few kids were out late, one of which was chasing the others around the playground. He was yelling, "The Gnawbone's gonna get ya! The Gnawbone's gonna get ya!" I knocked on the door of Rachel's house. Jack was behind me, one step down the narrow staircase. The sun was high in the cloudless sky, and the smell of the garbage by the door filled my nose. The door opened, and there was Rachel, bright-eyed and smiling. She invited us in. It was a small 3-story house on an estate near the primary school. We walked into the living room and sat down on a couch. The three of us drank coffee and talked for a while about all the things that had changed in the last several years. Rachel was now married. She had an 8-year-old daughter and was working part-time behind the counter of a service station a few streets away. We soon ran out of small talk, and I knew it was time to tell her about the real reason we were in town. I was considering how to bring it up without sounding like a conspiracy theorist when Jack went ahead and beat me to it. He told her all about his social work and the case files and the lack of investigation. He said we were down here to find information about any of the missing children and asked if she knew about anyone who had gone missing. Earlier that morning, I called up my sister. She's a few years younger than me, and after hearing the kid in the park the previous night, I had to learn more. I asked her when she'd been at school in the years below me if she'd ever heard about the Gnawbone. It turned out she had. In fact, my question came as quite a surprise to her. Doesn't everyone know that old story? Apparently, in the years after we first heard of and went looking for the Gnawbone, it had become the most popular ghost story for kids to tell each other in the lower years. She told me the kids all used to talk about it for a while at that age, but it was generally forgotten about in the later years. One particular memory that it brought back for my sister is a rumor she heard around age 10 or 11. One of the girls from the other school across town had supposedly disappeared and was never seen at school again. The reason, her classmates decided, was the Gnawbone. It had taken her away into the woods to eat her. My sister said she never really believed it herself. I guess I was the only one in our family who would have at the time. She never did forget it, though. And then, a couple of hours later in Rachel's living room, her 8-year-old daughter Sarah peeked her head around the doorway to the living room. "Are you talking about Tracy?" she asked. Rachel walked over to shoo her out of the room, but before she could, Jack said, "Did you know Tracy?" She was one of the kids he had found out about. Sarah nodded. "I haven't seen her since last year," she said. "The teachers all say she moved, but she didn't say goodbye." Rachel just stood there looking stunned that her daughter knew someone who could have gone missing under suspicious circumstances. I can't say I blame her. Jack kept on talking though, worried her mother would soon stop his questioning. "Did Tracy ever hang out with anyone older than her?" he asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, the other kids say something else though." "What do they say?" said Jack. "That the gnawbone got her." Jack excused himself, and we stepped out the front door before Rachel could process what had just happened. We walked across the street to where we parked the car. I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away onto the road. We both knew where we had to look next. We pulled up a few minutes later by the path down Landing Lane. It was midday, and it was quiet. Jack stepped out of the car and I followed suit. "Do you think we'll be able to find the asylum again?" said Jack. "Maybe. It was pretty deep in the woods. I don't exactly remember the way," I said. We walked up the path and turned off down the trail to the river. "Do you really believe it?" I asked. "I mean, that there's a creature called the Gnawbone out here?" "I don't know," Jack replied. "But I get the feeling the story stuck around for a reason." The two of us followed the trail across the bridge and turned left toward the old weir we hadn't seen in 13 years. It looked no different than it did back then, water trickling down the cracked concrete between piles of twigs and dead leaves. We walked on past and into the tree line. The woods were calm and still, no birds singing or breeze drifting through the branches. All I could hear was the sound of my footsteps over the dirt trail, in time with Jack's just ahead of me. We plodded through the woods for minute after long minute, until we came to a patch Jack thought looked familiar. I wasn't so sure, but we left the path and shoved our way through the overgrown brush. After a long time spent tangled in long and sharp trees, we didn't seem to be getting anywhere. We were going in a straight line. At least I thought we were. But even then, we were only kids when we came through the first time. We could easily have been going around in circles and been none the wiser. "Are you sure this is right?" I asked Jack. "Of course not," he replied. "It seemed like the best shot, though. Maybe we should go another direction." We changed our heading and pushed on through endless leaves and branches, the sunlight trickling down from above, not revealing much of anything. Then I heard Jack up ahead. "Hey, I think I found it." I crouched under a low branch and found myself in the clearing with the row of pine trees, just how I remembered from our last trip. "Wow, it really wasn't a dream then," I said. We walked up the road and along the line of trees. I didn't really know what to expect when we'd finally get there, or what kind of answers the old building might hold. Whatever we'd find, though, I was sure would be the key to our mystery. Then I saw it, looming over the path like a shadow. The abandoned asylum looked no different to how I remembered it. The cracked ceiling tiles and the layers of moss and the shattered window seemed exactly as we had left them, except for one tiny detail. Someone had written in spray paint the words, "The Pleasure Room," above the doorway. "Was that always there?" said Jack. "I don't think so," I said. Since there were no obvious signs of life, we walked up the steps and pushed the door open. It creaked open, the sound echoing in the room beyond. I peered through the widening gap and saw the same empty reception with the wooden desk built into the corner. Jack and I stepped inside. We walked up the staircase at the back of the room, having decided to start in the place we knew best. Coming out at the top, we stepped into the ward with the lines of hospital beds in either direction. I turned right and stopped almost immediately. There again was the graffitied poem that scared us as kids. I walk the trees. Night by night, I know each one by name. Inside I find the children all alone, and rip and tear and gnaw the bones. I'd forgotten what it said exactly. I said, no wonder it scared us. Yeah, there must have been some messed up teenagers back then, said Jack. I hope so, I said. Hey, that must have been where the name came from, gnaw the bones, said Jack. We turned away and paced the room looking for anything else of interest. Paint was peeling from the walls, and shards of glass lay in small puddles where the afternoon sun entered. We walked past rusty hospital beds until one of them caught both of our attention at once. Jack and I rushed over to it. On each side, attached to the metal, were a pair of handcuffs. What the hell? Said Jack. The dots were joining together for us now. The painted signs on both this building and the train cars, coupled with this, was too much to brush off as nothing. What do we do now? I said. Tell the police about all this. I don't think that's a good idea, said Jack. Why not? You really think this is some kind of cover-up? I said. That's what it looks like to me, said Jack. So what else do we do? I don't know, maybe someone out of the town. Maybe, I said. But we need more to give them, right? How do we know these weren't here 13 years ago? I don't remember them, said Jack. Maybe we should try Roger. He might remember if we don't. All right, it's a start, I guess. His old number doesn't work anymore, though. We walked through every other room with an eagle eye, but we didn't find anything else of interest. Having taken photos of the graffiti and the handcuffs, we left the building and stumbled our way through the woods until we eventually made it back to the car. As I drove back to my bed and breakfast, Jack scoured the internet on his phone to find a way of contacting Roger. I can't find him anywhere, no social media at all, said Jack. Anyone else who might know him? I asked. Jack kept on searching. I found his dad's business number. I could try that, he said. I looked across at the clock on the dashboard. It was before 5. Try it, I said, silently praying. Having another person helping would be a big improvement. Jack dialed and it rang forever, but eventually someone picked up and answered. Jack didn't spend long speaking to him, and from what I heard, it didn't go as I was hoping. Jack took the phone away from his ear and sat in silence. What is it? What did he say? I said. He invited us to go and meet them, said Jack. Okay, I said. Maybe they just want us to meet in person. I just realized something, said Jack. What? You remember that toy giraffe we found in the train cars? Yeah. Roger had one just like it.